Hello, and welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Schmidt List, episode number 28. This week, I'm talking to Anthony Ticknor, Vice President of Technology at Riley Hayes Advertising. Anthony joins me to talk about how to build, grow, and manage a development team. And just a heads up, the Schmidt List is going to take a break for the next 2 weeks while I prepare for some upcoming talks. You can see me at the Founders Sale at WeWork on May 7th or at the Twin Cities Product Conference on May 7th. And that's all the news. So here's my talk with Anthony. All right. Well, welcome, Tony, to the show. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me, Kurt.
So tell me, how did you get into development? How did you always want to grow up to be a programmer?
Yeah, I don't know that was ever a vision I had. You know, I think it goes back to sometime in the mid 80s. My father was a developer when I was a kid growing up, and he had a computer, and we had it in the mid 80s, and I fell in love with what it could do. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember, you know, getting a mouse and thinking how absolutely stupid it was. Thinking, who's going to use this? Like, how do I get back into the terminal? And as I grew up, I had that love of computers and started to discover the World Wide Web. Was able to, you know, at that time, right-click, view source, and it was everything you needed to know to learn. Mm-hmm. As I was growing up, I also had another passion, and that was music. And I had an opportunity to pair those two things, and I started making websites for you know, the bands I was playing in, and then ended up making websites for bands that I was playing with, and the knowledge just kept growing from there. And eventually, somebody said, "Hey, you seem to know what you're doing. Would you like to do this professionally?" And then I did.
I find it interesting because, I mean, I know there's lots of like apps out there that teach kids how to program and this and that, but I don't think, you know, as much as in the late 80s, early 90s, people had to deconstruct a lot of things in order to learn as much as they do these days.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more fundamentals and programs out there that kids or anyone can learn from to learn how to do this. I believe very strongly that programming is a trade. It can be taught to anyone. Someone can sit down and with the right materials can learn how to do this, just like you can learn how to be a plumber or an electrician.
Mm-hmm. I joke sometimes with folks, just like plumbers and electricians, maybe someday in the future, developers will have to be licensed as well because of how important the internet is going to become or has become to everybody's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought about that, and I've talked with many people before, and I think it makes some people uncomfortable. You need a license to practice, right? It doesn't seem that ridiculous to me, frankly.
Mm-hmm. If it's you know, certain type of properties, I mean, maybe it does make sense. I mean, healthcare.gov or, you know, some important portals out there, maybe, you know, you need to have a certain level of approval in order to work on those things.
And some of those things exist today. If you look at, you know, the world of healthcare with something like HIPAA or high trust, you're starting to see these standards that organizations are held to, not necessarily individuals, but organizations. And I could definitely see that sort of transferring down to individuals at some point.
Yeah, because there's ISO standards and some other things already, right? But
of course.
But, you know, in terms of the individual person versus the organization, I wonder if maybe in the future that makes more sense. But, you know, there's still plenty of unlicensed plumbers and electricians out there. I myself am one of those.
The same here.
I've installed a water heater before.
Oh, man, that's advanced.
Yeah. Well, it took only 10 hours and 4 trips to Home Depot. So
that is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I felt actually pretty good about that. Yeah, I never sweated pipes before, but that's an interesting process. You talk about a trade to learn. That was interesting.
Proof you can learn anything on YouTube, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about what you're doing these days. So you've been a programmer and designer for quite a while, very full stack. But nowadays you're the director of technology over at, vice president, of technology over at Riley Hayes. Why don't you tell me about what's your job like? What's your day-to-day like? What are your focus these days?
So my current role, as you said now, is Vice President of Technology at Riley Hayes. We're an agency downtown, a full-service agency. We do creative, we do technology, we do media placement, we do all the things you think of when you think agency. Mm-hmm. And right now, I direct and run the team down there, and that means a lot of things. We're a 40-person agency. Mm-hmm. So that means on some days, I'm worried about finding new business for the team. And that means on other days, I'm sitting at their desk, mentoring them, helping to let them to learn the craft better. Mm-hmm. It means on other days, I'm out doing podcasts with Kurt. Yep. And so it's a very multi-dimensional, multi-hat sort of role, mm-hmm. and it's something that I'm really enjoying because I'm learning a lot about a lot of other parts of the business that are not development, and those are really critical, to actually having a well-rounded view of the business world from a development perspective.
You have had the fortune of hiring a lot of developers in your career and interviewing and code reviews and all the above. What are some of the most important characteristics you've found in some of the best developers you've been able or fortunate enough to hire?
The number one thing that I'm always thinking about is the willingness of someone to say that they don't know and then figure it out. When I go into an interview and I'm talking with someone, I don't want to give away all my secrets, but I will ask them about a topic, and I will continue to ask deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper questions. And yes, I'm interested in the knowledge they bring to the table, but I also want to hear them say that they don't know, mm-hmm. and that they're going to go look and figure it out and get back to me. Mm-hmm. That's just not something that comes to people naturally to say, I don't know, especially at a big job interview, but that's really one thing that I'm looking for.
I've joked sometimes at Foundry where when we put out our job descriptions that maybe we should add a line that says must have at least 3 years of Stack Overflow experience.
Right. That's great. It's funny when I think about this too, when maybe people that have been around this a little bit longer like me were forced to say, I don't know, a little bit more, because if you didn't know, there wasn't a Stack Overflow or a Google. It was I don't know. I gotta figure this out. I gotta drive down to the library and see if the book that I need is there.
Right.
To figure out how to solve this problem, or I gotta look at 10 more websites and view the source and try and figure out what the heck's going on. Mm-hmm. So it's that information at your fingertips has made people professional Googlers and Stack Overflow aficionados.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about mentoring developers. So let's say I'm somebody who's working with a development team, and maybe we brought on somebody who's maybe struggling a bit, and sometimes I've seen where developers can really spin wheels and maybe not raise their hand and say, hey, I'm stuck, I need help. To your point about saying I don't know, right? Because maybe it just feels like the solution is just around the corner. If one more, just compile it again and just see this time and whatever. But how do you coach people out of that spinning wheels mentality?
First off, you have to create a culture around you where it's okay to not know, and that it is really team-based. Someone should, as soon as they feel like they're stuck, feel like they can ask for help, to have that open relationship to say, I've never done this before. Have you? Do you have any suggestions for how I could do it? And as someone who is mentoring and managing those kinds of people, you have to keep your eyes open for the signs that they're struggling, or where can you interject yourself in a way that you're helpful, not in a derogatory or negative way, but that you build them up and you let them know that it's okay to make mistakes, and you've made very similar ones. I've made more mistakes than I could possibly count, and you just have to emphasize that you can make mistakes. That's fine. Just learn from them, mm-hmm. and we'll be better next time as we work on it.
I found that when you've got maybe somebody new, somebody maybe fresher than 3 months, their focus is a lot on like, I got hired here, I'm supposed to know everything, and it can be stressful because you don't want to get fired because you don't know the answer to this thing, but you don't know for sure. You don't know exactly what the culture is like. You had a couple hours of interviews,
right?
But you're also maybe bringing some baggage from another place. And so you're sitting there and you're like, oh man, maybe I gotta take this home over the weekend or something, because I can't not know what this is. And what I've found being a leader within those developers is being the first person to say, I don't know, and saying it a lot in order to help create that culture. Do you find that to be helpful for you?
Yeah, I definitely find it to be helpful. You describe me as a full stack developer, but I do have a tendency to prefer and know more about the front end. So frankly, when I work with the guys that I work with now, I'll be there and I will oftentimes jump into a back end problem and I will ask them for help. And I'll be, hey guys, how would you do this? Look how I did this. What would you do better?
Yep.
And one thing that we do is we sit down as a group pretty much every week, and we have like a group code review where we come in and we say, okay, what did people work on in the last week? They want to show off to other people or ask if other people had ideas to share about how to do it better. And like I said, just building that culture where the whole team is able to communicate and talk about better ways to do things, because if you're not having those kind of discussions, I guarantee there is someone on your team that is spinning their wheels and feeling like they're stuck, and they just need your support, and they will do great.
Part of the interview process is that code review or code challenge, right?
Right.
What's some advice that you'd give somebody that's maybe creating a code challenge for the first time, or maybe they're getting some I don't know, hit and miss on their current code challenge? What are some of the things that they should be really focused on for that code challenge?
One of the things about providing potential employees a code challenge to do is that you have to make sure that you're measuring the right things. You can give people a challenge, but if they come back to you and you're not able to measure them all equally and measure what you want to measure, then it's very ineffective on your side. So what I would say is look at it, try and come up with something simple, something someone can get done and turned around within a day tops. It's got to be quick, and it's got to just give you a starting place to talk. So when they come in for an interview, you can ask them questions about why they did something. And that really opens up the door to what's going on, because if you don't have the rationale and you just look at code, it doesn't really mean anything.
The code reviews that I've been a part of in the past, it's really, you want to understand how they make decisions.
Right.
You want to understand how they overcome challenges. I'm sure you've seen some unique approaches to what you thought was a pretty straightforward
Absolutely.
code challenge before, right?
And I always want to ask about it and just say, why did you choose that way? Can you think of a better way to do it, or how would you ask for help to do this in a better way? And one of the things, this goes back to what I'm looking for in an interview. Frankly, if I hire somebody who can answer every question and coded the code challenge to 100% of what I expected, then that's not someone that may be right for the job either, because you don't want to hire somebody that already has all the skills of their current job, or they'll be bored with it. You want someone who's going to push, who's going to stretch, who has things to learn that you can help grow.
Yeah, and I think that's a struggle that I see with people hiring these days, because they're looking for maybe senior talent, and I'm using air quotes here. The issue, though, is that developers, just like anybody, wants to grow in their position. So you bring in somebody to help share the load, as it were, at a higher level. But how can you keep providing those new challenges for those people? Sure, the work might be different than what they did before, but really when it comes down to when they're typing on the keyboard, it's kind of the same thing, right? So what are some ways that you keep senior talent more engaged as you're going along through projects and those sorts of things?
Right. One of the things that I like to do is try and get people involved in the non-coding aspect of the job. As you know, and I hope as some of the listeners know, that is just as or more challenging than the coding part. Being able to sit down and talk with a customer about what their problems are and what they're thinking about to potentially solve it, and what ideas you can bring to the table to solve it that maybe they had thought of and maybe they hadn't. Really is a creative exercise.
Sure.
And so I like to take those people that are doing the similar thing at the keyboard all day to really get them in there and get their brain around the problem that a customer has. And then they can take that back and think about, okay, now I may have written this code before, but it's solving this specific problem. Is there a different approach that I could take that would be helpful?
But don't developers just want to sit in a dark room and be left alone with their headphones on? Isn't that really?
And don't forget, no flash photography either.
Yes, well, no photography, period. Let alone flash photography.
It's very very much like